You're listening to Dark Waters Radio, storytelling perfected. In today's tale, we journey to the Great Dismal Swamp, a vast, flooded forest straddling the border between Virginia and North Carolina. This wetland is home to a diverse array of plant and animal species, but also holds secrets shrouded in mystery and folklore. Our story begins with a member of the Fish and Wildlife Service, surveying the swamp to analyze the environmental impacts of the annual drying out of parts of the marsh. While documenting the ecological changes in the tea-colored water, he encounters something that will shake his understanding of this landscape. What follows is his account of a day that began like any other, but ended in an experience he'll never forget. As we descend into the swamp on today's Dark Waters Radio, be prepared to traverse the boundary between known reality and the unknown. The trees hang heavy with Spanish moss. The air is thick with humidity, and the creatures lie in wait just below the surface. Let us enter the Great Dismal Swamp.
The Great Dismal Swamp once covered nearly 1 million acres between northeastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia. Between 1620 and around the time of the Civil War, it served as a thriving refuge for runaway slaves who chose to build their lives here in freedom, no matter the conditions.
You have venomous snakes biting insects and flies, thick cover of greenbriers. A great place as a refuge for wildlife, not as much probably a great place refuge for people.
As many as 50,000 runaway slaves, called maroons, an indigenous term, settled here on small rises of land known as Messick Islands. Chris Lowy manages the swamp's National Wildlife Refuge in Suffolk, Virginia.
The amazing part about the escaped slaves living here in the swamp is that the conditions living in here were better for them than being enslaved.
They established hidden communities in these heavily treed wetlands, building cabins and possibly farming small plots of land. Researchers believe the former slaves fed their families by hunting deer, wild turkey, and other game, skills they may have learned from Native Americans who also sought shelter here.
The annual drying of the Great Dismal Swamp is essential to maintaining the health of the habitat, but it was always unsettling to me. Working as a wildlife biologist for U.S. Fish and Game Service, I was responsible for monitoring how the wildlife was impacted by the manufactured drought that we would create every year by closing off the dams and flooding that swamp area of everything that it needed. And it's amazing how we as human beings have gotten to the point to where we control our environment. 100 years ago, areas of the Great Dismal Swamp would consistently be flooded. And the only thing that would dictate the movement of the water was rain. But nowadays we have the technology to transform landscapes within weeks. I need you to understand, I had witnessed this process many a time, but this particular year it felt different. There was this serious, heavy feeling in the air as I rode out there alone on my four-wheeler just to check on the deer habitation since the drought had started. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your gut instinct kicks in and you know you should listen to your gut? It's your friend. But you know something's wrong, something's off, but you still ignore it. Ever since I was a little kid, I was that way. I remember the first time I got a gut feeling, I was 9 years old. Walked outside, went around the side of my house to get my bicycle, and I just had this bad feeling that I shouldn't be riding the bike that day. But I ignored it, hopped on the bike anyway, and rode no more than 40 yards up the road when my neighbor's dog comes charging through the screen door and attacks me. Luckily, I was able to keep the bike between me and the dog while I screamed for my dad to come outside and help me. Yeah, I'll tell you, there's something to be said for trusting your instincts. And I should have trusted my instincts the evening that these events happened, but I didn't. Imagine the scene, I'm riding along, and I need you to understand something. The mosquitoes are absolutely bananas out there as it starts to dry up, because the first warm body they can find to feed on, they swarm to you. I'm talking about I have hundreds of mosquitoes all over me as I'm driving along. And I believe those mosquitoes are the reason why I didn't kind of detect all of this before. But I get to this point, maybe it was a combination of the heat and the mosquitoes that had me off my game. But I tell you, I get to this point in the swamp where it's known by everybody who works around here that there was a swamp witch that lived back there. Real spooky feeling in that area. I've even been out there on foot while I was walking around in this exact same area. From 40, 50 yards away, it would look like someone was hung from a tree by a rope in this very same spot. So I get to that particular area and it feels all weird and spooky, but I'm used to that. I've been out here plenty of times. I push forward and keep moving. And that's when I come to this area of dried out reeds. You know, swamp reeds are tall, 8-foot tall reeds. They're normally less lush green color, but when the water but after 2-3 weeks of the water not being there, they're just tall, tan, brown reeds that make all this noise when the wind blows. Well, I'm there taking notes. To the right-hand side of me is 8-foot tall patch of reeds. It runs for about 40 yards. And then there's an open space and a tree, and then the reeds pick up again. So I'm there taking notes about the water levels, that the snails have gone away. Writing down that the ecosystem is responding the way it's supposed to respond when you dry it out like this. Now, while I'm there sitting on my four-wheel, I start to hear this noise in the reeds, and initially I'm thinking it's one of the deers that we're tracking out here. So I pull out my GPS device and I start looking to see if it's one of the deers. But none of those deers are in this area. And it gets louder, like something is coming in my direction. And so now I have my full attention turned to those reeds. The distance between me on this four-wheeler and those reeds is right about 50 yards. And again, I have my full attention turned to these reeds. And I start to see this section at the top of the reeds, about 7.5 feet tall, where they start to spread apart and open. And as they're spreading, the first thing I'm starting to see is these gigantic pointy ears. And I need you to understand, I'm not 20 yards away from this. I'm pretty far away. So I'm trying to make sure my brain is not playing tricks on me. Because you know how they have the little tips of the reeds? Well, these ears are up above the tips of the reeds. And they're jet black and they're humongous. Those ears that are straight up in the air, they lay down flat, and I see this head and this snout begin to push through the reeds. And we ain't talking about at the bottom of the reeds. We're talking about 7.5 feet up in the air through those reeds. And I'm realizing that this ain't no deer. This ain't no animal I ever seen before. This looks like a giant black, I mean jet black Doberman pinscher head, but it is massive. And it's looking at me. The eyes are so big from this distance, I can see that they are bright yellow eyes. Understand, this is my first time seeing something like this, so I'm kind of inquisitive, but afraid at the same time. Well, all the curiosity bleeds and drains right out of me when this thing bluff charges me. And I'm gonna do my best to try and explain to you the speed at which it moved, because since I've had my encounter, I've listened to a lot of Dogman Encounters, and people say, oh, they're fast, they can chase down a car, they can do this, they can do that. When I tell you move from those reeds and close half the distance between me and itself in about 2.5 seconds, and then stopped to where I got a quick glimpse at it, growled, and then turned and took back off into the reeds, and all of this happened in about 6 seconds. We're talking about emotion and the movement so damn fast that for a moment I didn't believe that what I saw was real. But my body reacted to it like it was real. My heart thumping in my chest, blood pressure rising to the point to where I got a sharp headache, and me feeling like I need to piss on myself. When I tell you it came out, it was there, and then it was gone, that's how fast it was moving. Listen to me good when I say this to you. I'm not here to try and convince you of my encounter. All I'm doing is reporting it to you. Listen, the day I saw that, I almost hurt myself driving out of there on that four-wheeler. Get this. 2 days later, I got to go back because I got to finish my report. I go back to the exact same area. And when I pull out my GPS tracker, all of the deer seem to be huddled over there in those high reeds. So I tiptoe over there and check it out. And over in that reeded area, you can tell where this thing had been bedded down, and it has eaten each and every one of the deer that we were tracking. All of them. I'm talking about ripped and torn into shreds, flies all over the place. You want to hear some crazy stuff? I go back, I report this to my boss. And he goes on to tell me that he has seen the exact same thing in the area during the drying. When I asked him what it was and why I was there, he said he doesn't know. All he knows is when you're moving through that area during the drying, you need to be extremely careful because these things have access to areas that they wouldn't normally have access to.